So, and this is a cliche, but it's absolutely true. Snow emergencies aren't really about snow, they're about parking.
Welcome to the Streets.mn podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful uptown Minneapolis, Minnesota, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. Snow season is upon us, which is one of the most challenging things for our transportation system in our state. It's the perfect time to take a deep dive on the process of snow removal, so our producer Stina Neel sat down with Sean Kershaw, who's director of St. Paul Public Works, and Lisa Hiebert, who's the communications and public services manager for St. Paul Public Works, to chat about it. They recorded just as St. Paul was wrapping up their first snow emergency of the season. Let's dive in.
So, just to kind of get a background feel for the network, how many miles are we talking? Sidewalks, trails, bikeways? What's the scope?
We cover about 1,800 lane miles when we plow, and that's streets. We have about 100 bridges in St. Paul that we cross, and over 230 miles of bike lanes throughout St. Paul, and a number of sidewalks and stairs that we shovel as well, public sidewalks and stairs. So it's quite a bit for the capital city.
And then as we're recording, this is the first snow emergency of the season. How are you feeling? Things a little busy over there?
I would say that things are busy. We're always a little tired. The thing about snow emergencies, which people might not realize, is they're this incredible team effort. I mean, it's literally hundreds of people that come together to make a snow emergency work. And so there really is this rush about it. You know, I'm usually down with the supervisors and the drivers when they leave, hang out with the ticketers, or there when they get back in the morning. And there's this real rush to it. I think with that rush comes some exhaustion at the end of it because, you know, it's a late night. We spend lots of time working with the public and officials. Lisa spends a huge amount of time communicating with the public. So it's both a rush. We're happy with the outcome, and it gets tiring.
And so I moved here from the Florida Keys about 5 years ago. So this weather is what I moved here for. Do you like snow, or do you see the forecast and you're like, it's going to be a busy week?
I will admit that I like four seasons, and I've always loved snow. I grew up in a place that had it only occasionally. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. I am also a weather nerd. I wanted to be a meteorologist when I was in elementary school, so I've always paid attention to the weather. In the wintertime, there's a certain amount of anxiety that comes because you really, with snow, putting on my pretend meteorologist hat, they can say there's going to be snow in 10 days. You really don't know until 2 or 3 days out. And so we pay attention, we're monitoring it, and then you've got to watch it really closely. So it's excitement and anxiety both.
I would just add to that. I think the word I would add agree is anxiety. Before joining Public Works, I love the snow, I love winter. And now I think of snow so differently, of the type of snow and when it's coming and how, what are the road temperatures. So I look at winter much differently than I did before I started working for Public Works.
No, Lisa raises a great point because you're monitoring pavement temperatures, you're monitoring the snow water ratio, you're watching temperature changes, you're watching wind speeds, that you're watching the sun, the arc of the sun. Is it going to be sunny? Is it a snow in December, which is really different than the same snow in late February? So you're suddenly aware of all of these nuances to how the snow comes down and then what happens afterwards.
Much like snowflakes, every snow and winter event is different. There is never the same one ever. They're all different.
And maybe, Christina, this is, more than what you asked for, but one of the things that's really real for Lisa and I is how different the snows are now than they were 20 years ago. And so, it's not a cliche with climate change. It used to get cold, there would be snow, varying amounts of snow, but it would mostly, except for an occasional thaw, be cold and then it would warm up. Now we're getting these huge temperature fluctuations. We're getting rain with snow. The snow emergency we just had was preceded by rain. So that changes it. When rain comes down on snow and then it gets really cold, it turns the snow into concrete. And so the types of snow are changing a lot. We had a snow back in 23 that was, I don't know, it was like 10 inches, but it was the heaviest by weight that we've ever received. And the snow was pushing the plows. The plows were getting pushed away from the curb by the weight of the snow. We can get snows that are super, a different water content ratio where it just blows off the plow. You get these great wakes of the snow.
Can I ask about that? You said the water content ratio. I've seen that in forecasts or after it snows, they release those numbers, and to the layperson, I'm like, I don't know.
I'll start. A low ratio, if that's the right word, I'm not great at math, would be, 8-to-1, for example. And that implies for 8 inches of snow, it's about 1 inch of water. A 20-to-1 snow, you get all this depth, but you get 2 feet of snow almost, but only an inch of water content in there. And so how we treat those is really different. A wet, heavy snow literally becomes this dangerous projectile when it flies off the plow blades. And so, in a snow emergency, part of the instruction will be for folks to watch their speed so they don't accidentally throw the snow onto sidewalks. With a really high water content ratio, the snow just sort of, flies into the air, and it's almost like dust.
Right. That's the difference between like snowman snow versus the fresh powder skiing snow. Got it. What is a snow emergency and who decides it?
So, and this is a cliche, but it's absolutely true. Snow emergencies aren't really about snow. They're about parking. And so the fundamental thing of a snow emergency is it triggers different parking regulations so that we can get in and clean the streets or the trails or the sidewalks. But it's really about vehicle parking. It's the nice thing about trails is we can clean off trails really at any time. You can bring a brush or bring a pickup plow down them. But a snow emergency sets in place a specific set of parking rules. And so on a normal day, if a car is on a street for more than 48 hours, it's technically, you can ticket it. In a snow emergency, if it's in the wrong spot at the wrong time, you can ticket it immediately and have it towed. And so the goal in any city about snow emergency is getting the cars in the right spot so you can clean the streets. Lisa, what would you add?
I would add that snow emergency is probably one of the biggest times that we come together as living, working here in St. Paul, because in order for us in Public Works to get those streets plowed and get that snow out of the street, we really have to work with all the residents, all the visitors, all the businesses to, have people move hundreds of thousands of cars, twice in 24 hours. It's a lot to ask and a lot to work with our residents, but they really are the key in cooperating with us to make snow emergencies successful. And, moving your car, leaving it there might seem easy. I'm not going to walk around that corner and move my car, but it does impact the way that we're able to clean those streets. And it's one of the biggest complaints we get is people don't move their cars. So again, this is really, we say Team St. Plow, and we really mean it to have to work with everybody to make it successful.
And the decision making is kind of fascinating because legally it's the mayor's call. And so the mayor of St. Paul, Melvin Carter, always is the final decider. I don't think he's ever not listened to my recommendation or taken my recommendation. He always listens. But my recommendation is coming from talking to Lisa, talking to our plow drivers. Literally, we will send people to different parts of the city to say what's the snow depth, what's the street conditions. And so, at the top of the pyramid is the mayor, but informing that, we'll talk to Minneapolis and find out, how are conditions in Minneapolis. It's this huge group conversation. And then what we'll do at the city, which most people don't realize, is for the implementation of a snow emergency, almost every single department is involved. There are legal aspects. Obviously, there's aspects with parking and parking enforcement officials. There's, the libraries have their reaction. Parks is a key part. Parks and sewers and traffic operations loan their drivers to us for a snow emergency, because a common question is, how do you suddenly come up with all those drivers? And we borrow them from other functions. So sewers stops their work, forestry stops their work, traffic operations, other than emergencies. So it's this huge group effort across all different departments in the city to do this really, really important service for the public.
It's not just coming together at the beginning. It really is this constant talking throughout the snow emergency. Obviously we're working very closely with, our fire department and our police department, making sure, first and foremost, they can get where they need to get, to address any emergencies. And we're talking with the school district. I mean, they are another big partner, Metro Transit, Ramsey County. And, there's a lot of people that we are talking with, and seeing what they're seeing and getting their input to help make that decision. So, and again, not just at the beginning, but throughout the process of where there might be some challenges that we need to keep addressing.
And I mean, Ian tells his students a lot, like, you'll never get away from group projects. Like, at every single job you will ever have in your lifetime, there will be a group project. And like, government is, I don't think I've ever worked solo on anything in my career, but every snowstorm will have plowing, but not every snowstorm becomes a snow emergency, correct?
In our current system, yes, you're 100% correct. One of the questions that people often ask, and Lisa has to answer hundreds of times a year, is when will you start plowing? And we start plowing. We will start preparing if the ground is frozen before the snow arrives. We'll put down what we call brine, which is a really it's a way to use less salt and make it easier to get the snow off the streets. When it starts snowing, we'll be plowing the main streets, what we call arterials and collectors. And so we will begin doing that anytime it snows, all the time. Snow emergencies, and it's one of the reasons we're looking at different strategies, are mostly about residential parking. And so that's where there's this threshold, usually above 3 inches, that we tend to call a snow emergency.
There's city streets versus county streets. Is there any overlap? Like, are your drivers ever like, well, I'm driving this way anyways, I might as well plow the street on my way to my other street?
What we do, I'll answer a couple of questions with that, is we've got maintenance agreements with the county and with MnDOT, so the State Transportation Department. So we maintain in St. Paul all of their streets except for like Highway 61 and 94 and 280. So we've got maintenance agreements. We have defined levels of service. They pay us to maintain their streets in St. Paul.
Because I think that's something that when I was working in Carver County previously, someone would call me and they're like, well, I'm in the city and I saw the county truck. Why is it here? And I'm like, well, they're on their way anyways. Just, your street's getting plowed. Have fun.
When we were at, I usually go to what we call our snow operator snowplow operator training. And it's funny, one time a county person came in and said, there's no way I would plow a St. Paul street, just because any urban street, St. Paul or Minneapolis, you've just got a lot more obstacles. One of the biggest, because people will say, well, why can't you plow like you do in West St. Paul? Well, West St. Paul doesn't allow, nothing against West St. Paul. They've got driveways, they've got garages. They don't allow cars on the streets in the wintertime. And so I know we're spending all this time talking about cars, and you don't usually do this on this podcast, but urban streets with all the cars, it is a really exciting experience to be driving a plow down a street when you've got cars parked on both sides.
Yeah, that's something that, like, of course, we're big pedestrian advocates here at Streets MN. And like when people ask us like, oh, like I want bump outs and I want all of this pedestrian infrastructure or bike lanes and things where it's going to be impacting potentially where plow drivers are going to be. And I feel like there's such a delicate balance of, well, we want these things, but we also want them to not be taken out by plows every single winter. So like, where do you find that? Where do you find the balance of what everyone wants?
It's not, there's never an exact, it's a really great question. If you were to ask I'm going to stereotype our long-term drivers, just get rid of the bump outs, give me straight curbs, get rid of the cars. The truth of the matter is they're really good at negotiating and cars. And so our drivers get really good. A funny thing is the radial curve of the bump out matters more than anything else. And where that, I'm going nerdy, like if there's a catch basin in that bump out, I mean, it's easier to plow if you have no cars and just a straight curb. It normally boils down to, finances. We redid George Street in St. Paul this year, and we added a bunch of bump outs to make it safer. There was a pedestrian death, they were on a scooter on George in Ohio, a month and a half before we put bump outs on that street. And bump outs are really important for public safety. We added medians with safe crossing. Those create more maintenance responsibilities, but it's really critical that we add those improvements into our capital projects.
I saw that you got your CDL so that you could drive the plow. And yeah. I want to know, like, what is the training like for someone? If someone's like, I think I want to drive a plow when I grow up, what does that look like? Because, yeah, driving on city streets where you have to manage bump outs, there's cars, there's all kinds of things, and you're in a massive vehicle in the middle of like a treacherous snowstorm. Like that's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. It was really, it was like a childhood dream to get to drive a snowplow and have a CDL. So, I professed to have a good education, but I really wanted to drive a truck. The biggest thing about it is in some ways it's like driving any vehicle. The biggest thing is the spatial awareness. So from my head as a driver to the front tip of the plow when it's all the way out I think I counted, it's about 13 feet. And that plow blade is 12 feet, it's a weapon essentially. And we treat it very carefully, so that we don't damage cars or anything like that. And so the spatial awareness is the hardest part because when you're driving a plow, you can't see the bottom right corner of your plow blade, the one that's up against the curb. You can't, there's a flag that shows roughly where it is. You just have to feel what does that curb feel like when you're on it. Backing up is a whole new thing. Turning is a whole new thing. How you position the plow when you turn. It's kind of, I'm not a gamer, but on top of the fact that you're in an enormous heavy vehicle, you're manipulating the plow blade left, right, up and down, and you're manipulating assault control and you're steering, obviously. And so a part of it is just putting all those pieces together. You're also bouncing around a lot. I mean, Lisa's done this to give somebody a ride in a plow when you're moving a ton of snow. Your back is sore by the end of the shift because you've been bouncing. It's really, and if you hit a catch basin, you think you just destroyed the truck. It's so loud and jarring.
It is a pretty treacherous job, and it's exciting and a little dangerous. And we should have a lot more respect for our plow drivers because they're out there at 3, 4 a.m. What time does a plow driver's day start, or does it end?
It will start during a snow emergency. It may start at 8 o'clock at night. Some of them double over, and so they'll do 16 hours. What I probably should have mentioned, and Lisa will have more better thoughts, is part of it was fun for me to drive. The real point, though, is how we communicate with the public. It helps to have the experience from a driver's standpoint. And as we're talking about new snow strategies in St. Paul, we're listening to our drivers in that. So yeah, it was fun. I got to do it. I'm the worst driver we have, but it's really about learning from the drivers about how do we do that work better with the community.
I would just also add, riding in a plow, and I have had a chance to drive a plow on our obstacle course, not on the streets. And it is really tough. And it is, I don't think it's like, Sean, you said it's like driving a big vehicle, a big truck. I disagree. It's like driving a tank. I don't know what I would compare it to. And the thing that I find most amazing is, again, there's all these switches and they're maneuvering everything, the blade, the salt, the speed, everything like that. But at the same time, they are using, like, you have to use your mirrors. And the biggest thing that I would compare that to is, we get in our cars day in, day out, and, we get little flashing lights, we get little beeping, and we get all these sensors that tell us where we're going, or if we're getting too close, or if we're crossing over a line. None of that is in these trucks. I mean, this is really an amazing skill that the drivers do, and to do it in horrible conditions is just astounding. So kudos to that.
One of my biggest learning moments was having to plow a cul-de-sac dead end. I mean, which is a cul-de-sac, because it's also like this geometry lesson, because you have to not just move when you're plowing it onto the boulevard. It's pretty straightforward, but our good drivers know exactly where to put the snow, where to back up, where to turn. It's this like in their head geometry. I think they know it amongst themselves, how good they are at it, but I don't think the public realizes how complicated it is. And if you screw up, really bad things happen. And so literally, because one of the things I'll go back to is you're doing all of this and making sure that you don't throw snow onto the sidewalk. So you have to go fast enough to get it off the street, but not so fast that you throw it into somebody's mailbox or onto the sidewalk. And so they're constantly monitoring it. I will say also, I know you're sorry you asked this question. Some of the biggest environmentalists in the department are our plow drivers, because they're out there. Many of them fish, many of them, enjoy the water, and they are the most adamant about using as little salt as possible. Now, I know salt is a whole nother conversation and there are feelings about it, but in general, our drivers know it's expensive and they know it stays in the water. And so that was also a surprise to know how much the drivers themselves monitor their own salt activity.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask. That was something that we got in our Blue Sky post of what questions do you want to ask? And someone asked, what's the stuff that comes out of the truck? And we talk about brine, salt. Is there other liquids? What is it?
Again, salt is a really important product that we use very, very carefully, because again, we do know that it isn't a pollutant, but it's needed for safety, especially when we have icy conditions like we got with this first snow. So we have two different types of salt products. We have kind of the regular salt, and then we have a treated salt. And I forget what the chemical is that is the treated salt. But that will work at lower temperatures. Salt will melt ice, and that's why it's such an important winter tool to keep our streets safe. The other thing that we do is we brine. And so in St. Paul, we create our own brine mix with just the regular rock salt. And that goes into the trucks. And when we know a winter weather event is coming, we will get out and brine the streets. So when people see like little white lines on the streets, that's been brined, and that's a salt product that's put down. And again, we use that sparingly, mostly on the arterial and collector streets. And we will do that wherever we can, because that helps prevent the snow to bind and create that ice on the streets. But when we have like this last winter weather event, when it starts as rain or freezing rain, we can't brine because it just washes it right down into the storm sewer system. And then it's not going to work. So that's really hard when we see these winter weather events start as that rain. It's hard we end up playing catch up a lot of times because we can't put down brine. But yeah, so those are our different salt products, and use them different ways all winter long.
We don't use sand and gravel in St. Paul, only in rare circumstances if it's like really cold, because it really, people think it works, and in most cases it just washes into the storm sewer and blocks them up. It really doesn't achieve what people hope it will achieve. Right, Lisa?
Yeah, again, it can provide that initial traction, but then it just gets pushed out into parking lanes and down into the storm sewers, which creates its own problems on the system. The other thing that we did talk about that I think is really critical is that we pre-wet the salt also when it comes out of the truck, which means it activates the salt right away, and then it sticks it in the drive lane, because that's where they're trying to spread it, in that drive lane, because it will naturally get pushed more into the parking lanes. Again, trying to be careful about how and where we use the salt and not putting it anywhere and everywhere, but being really intentional of activating it and pre-wetting it so it stays in the drive lanes first.
So let's say I'm a driver and it's the beginning of my shift. Is there like a section of town? Do you get a map, or do the trucks have GPS loaded up that says this is your route today, and get out there and do it?
It's a great question. If you can imagine, the system we use is 30 years old, and it's literally 30 years old in the standpoint of right now, and we can talk about where we're going. We have routes. We have about, do we have 70 routes? We have 72 routes in the city. Some of them, about half of them, are nighttime routes during a snow emergency. The other half are daytime. And then we have routes for when we're just doing like main streets. Those routes are all on paper clipboards. So unless a driver has memorized their route, at the end of every block, they're looking at the paper clipboard to say, where do I go next? And A, it's really archaic. B, it's slower because you're stopping, you're idling, you're wasting fuel. And what we're in the process of doing right now is implementing what we call a vehicle route optimization system. And so it's routes, turn-by-turn routes on tablets. Part of what's really different, so people are saying, well, why, we've had this for driving for 20 years. Snow is done, it's still two-dimensional, but it's not point-to-point. It's truly two-dimensional. So I live off of West 7th Street. It's a very different pattern. You're not just going from Kellogg to St. Clair. You've got 6 lanes of traffic, or 6 lanes to clear. And so the new system we'll be implementing sometime in 26, provides turn-by-turn routes. So there are routes. We actually match our ticketing routes with the plowing routes. So, and they're also evenly distributed, that we don't hit a certain part of town first. We tend to go all over the city, and then it takes a while to complete all of the routes.
I'm picturing, do you remember the snake game? Where
I'm probably too old.
No, it's like a game that I used to play on like the calculator or the phone, where you have the little snake and then it just kind of goes up and down on the grid, or like in Tron. That's something else I think of.
The funny part is one of the things that we get a lot of complaints about all winter long is, I saw plows drive by me with the blades up and they weren't plowing. And I saw a plow on another street and they didn't come down my street. So if you saw these plow routes, these lists of streets, it's really kind of confusing to look at that, because it doesn't seem logical. But the routes are optimized for right turns primarily, and routes will crisscross. So just because you see a plow on the street over from you doesn't necessarily mean that plow is going to come down your street next. It's not, the routes don't seem or look logical in any way, but they are optimized and trying to make it easy as possible for our plow drivers.
One of the biggest misconceptions is, why don't they put the plow blades down? When they're plowing, they do 100% of the time. Then there's even different ways that you can have the plow down, floating or fixed. There's all sorts of, but these routes, are complicated. And with the new system, they're also time consuming to stop. We've got a lot of new drivers, which is really exciting. With the new system, it'll be much more efficient. So that means less time out with the engines running and more time, cleaning the streets. And so we think it'll save fuel and it will save time on the part of the drivers.
Another kind of fun misconception that we hear a lot about is, that we always start in one area and work our way across the city, which is absolutely false. All these routes are citywide, and when we have snow emergencies, they are starting from all different points in the city. So it's not like we start on one side of the city and work our way east, west, north, south. I mean, literally, we are starting all over the city. And so again, and plows have to get to their locations. So they're going to drive with the plows up to their routes, and they're plowing their routes. So, so we start all over the city, and there's not, one neighborhood that gets it before another neighborhood for a snow emergency.
Well, the one thing I'll add that I forgot to mention is all of our trucks do have what we call AVL, automated vehicle locating. So one common complaint is that you didn't hit my street, that my street wasn't plowed. And sometimes, and the cool thing is we can go back and look and say which truck at which time. And if for some reason we missed a street, we know that answer. Most of the time, it's just that there were so many cars parked on the street that we really couldn't clean it effectively, in that the cars were in the wrong spot. But we know how fast our trucks are going. We know where they are, when in the course of doing their work.
So something that you talked about, so the vehicle route optimization network, that's coming up next year. What else? What else is new?
Yeah, Lisa and I both survived the winter of 22 and 23. And that was the winter that technically we got the third most snow ever. We got actually the most precipitation ever because we had 3 rainstorms on top of the snow. And that winter showed that the current system we have, we don't think is the best. Huge ruts would develop on the street, which is frustrating for everybody, including our drivers. And the types of snow were difficult, even when we could. Right now, I thought about this driving home from the meeting we had last night, Lisa. We really can only get into residential streets in the 96 hours of a snow emergency for the most part. We can do what we call center cuts. What we are testing is a different model that we're borrowing from, some other places. Most other cities have what they call alternate side parking. And that's where one day of the week, or one time you park on one side and then parking's prohibited on the other. What that does is open up 2/3 of the street, and we don't have to call a snow emergency to get in there and clean it. And so there was a snow event in 23 where it started snowing on Tuesday. It stopped on Thursday. We declared the snow emergency for Thursday night, but we didn't get into residential streets, most of them, until Friday morning. Well, from Tuesday to Friday, cars were compacting the snow. It was just, and then when we got in there, it was tough to plow. One of the advantages of the new model that we're testing is that we can get in earlier. We can keep going back. One of the hardest things, we can talk about what Lisa said, and that snow is social. We're trying to get people to move their cars twice in 24 hours. And, there's a lot coming at people in today's world. In that model, the message is just keep your car parked where it should legally be parked, just period. So if we get a snow on a Tuesday, we've got from Tuesday until that next Sunday to go in and clean that street. We think it'll work better. We think it will actually use less salt. We think it'll meet people's expectations. So that was a long answer, but Lisa can add to it.
Yeah, again, we're open to learning from others and what works in other cities. Everybody approaches snow differently. We can't do what our suburb neighbors can do, put on full-on parking bans. We know, being an urban city, on-street parking is needed in our community. And again, so we need to work with that and find a model that will work. And a lot of urban cities do have this alternate side parking. A lot of them are every day. So people have to move their car every day during the winter months. What we're looking at with our pilots and doing this feasibility study is, having that be weekly. So 1 week you park on the odd address side of the street, you switch on a Sunday and you park on the even address side of the street. So every Sunday you just move your car. And what we've learned from other cities is that becomes a regular habit, and compliance is easier, again, especially on residential streets, because again, we're really focusing on residential streets. Keeping 2/3 of that residential streets open, emergency vehicles can always get through, never an issue, should never be an issue there. But then we can get those plows in anytime. So if the arterials are looking pretty good, we can really start going into those residentials and moving the snow out of the street, not just doing center carts and pushing it into the cars. So there are a lot of advantages, and the pilots that we did last year, some people didn't necessarily like it, but it showed that it could be successful on the majority of our residential streets. So we're building off of what we learned last year to do pilots again this year. And hopefully we get a little bit more snow so it can really be tested than last year. But we're really excited to kind of take what we learned and challenge the model and ourselves a little bit more to see how this can work in St. Paul.
Yeah, like I'm in uptown Minneapolis, and I don't know, like I stopped owning a car this year, and I am still everyone's expert on, hey, it's a snow emergency, where am I supposed to park? And I'm like, here's the website, put in your address. If it's red, that means don't park there. Like, and yeah, you're right. If it's not a habit, then it's a little panic inducing every time. That was a question that we got from someone was, it's my first winter in Minnesota, which I was like, congratulations, welcome. What can I do to help our streets be easier to clear? Is it simply just move your freaking car?
We joke, there's kind of a lovingly way that we're like, just move your damn cars and work with us. So, I think, first and foremost, understanding, what it means when we declare a snow emergency and what the parking rules are, using our tools, signing up for our alerts, and moving your car. But there's also more things in there, because it's working with residents and businesses when people, plow their driveways or their sidewalks or the alleys or the parking lots, that people aren't pushing that snow into the street, because our plows are going to come right along and push it right back. So we want to, again, work with people and not just keep pushing the snow back and forth. That doesn't do anybody any good. So trying to get the snow in the boulevard is really important, and that space can get really tight. But probably number one thing is move your cars. I don't know, Sean, what else?
Both cities have really good information systems in place. So whether you live in Minneapolis or in St. Paul, we've got text systems. We call every number that's registered in St. Paul. We've got emails, there's social, there's a number of different ways. One of the things, we've talked about the chemistry of snow and the physics of it, but Lisa highlighted the fact that snow is social, and that's one of the things that we talk about. So one of the ways that's really important is to sort of remind your neighbors to move their car, or help your neighbors out on their sidewalk, or remind your businesses that they've got to keep their sidewalks. So the social aspect of snow is as important as like the physics and the chemistry of it.
Yeah, that was another thing that folks brought up in our comment section was things like shoveling my sidewalk, chipping the drain when it's icy. I love my drain right by my house. I love to get out there. It's very cathartic in the winter when it ices over and you just get a little stabby with it. And getting folks to like John down the way owns a snowblower, so he gets out there and knowing that he's pointing it the right way so that it's easier for the plows and easier for everyone else. That's huge. But like how do we get people to do the right thing? Is it just spreading the information? I grew up Catholic, so I'm very shame driven. I don't know if that's quite going to work locally, but how do we get people to do it?
It's this shared experience, and I don't want to compare it to professional sports, but it is, I think in St. Paul, we love to complain about our plowing like we do the Vikings. And whether it's good or bad, it's this shared experience. And A, we're all in it together. And B, it really is something, it's one of the most direct things you can do to help your neighbors out, shoveling their sidewalk, helping to clear the corners. We've got this neighbor down the block, and he's like you, Christina. He clears all the storm catch basins every season. He shovels out the quadrants on his own. And when we talked to him, he said it's just part of what he contributes to the neighborhood. So I think when people do it, they see that you're literally making your neighborhood better, more walkable, safer. It's a shared problem, but it's also this great shared experience.
Yeah, I think that this really, winter showcases, that what being a good Minnesotan really kind of is, and people coming together and helping each other. If they're stuck, you push them out. You help shovel your neighbor's driveway, and I think what has been really kind of neat is for people to say, hey, I have these neighbors who just moved here, and they've never seen snow. They've never been in snow, or they speak a different language. Do you have any materials in a different language? And we do. And so we've got materials, and making sure that we can help get the resources and the information to the right people is a really important neighborly thing that really helps everybody out. I know that there's a couple people who ask for extra snow emergency brochures so they can put it in their apartment building, so people know the rules or how to sign up, and put it in like a shared community board. So we love that, and I think that is really a true Minnesotan coming together. And I do want to give a shout out to, there is another group here in St. Paul called the St. Louis City Snow Angels, and this is kind of a organic Facebook group that was started in the neighborhood. And this is a great place that if you have extra time, or that snow blower, or you just want to really get out and chip those storm drains, you can post that you're available, or people post that, hey, I broke my leg, I can't shovel my driveway, can I get some help? So it's a great way to connect people who can help with people who need help.
It's like the best workout I've ever done. I love shoveling snow because then I don't have to go to the gym. It's so much fun. I do have just like a personal question. Where do you get your weather reports? Do you have a favorite local meteorologist?
I've been chatting a lot with Matt Serwe from Channel 5, because he's a snow nerd. We buy weather reports. We subscribe to private services, and a lot of companies do. We subscribe to one called ClearPath, Lisa? So we get private, but what we really do is look at a ton of information. There's no single source. National Weather Service, as long as they're continue to be funded, is certainly reliable, but it's really pulling together a lot of information rather than any one particular source, I think.
And I think it goes back to something we said earlier, that with all the technology and all the weather prediction and the models, it really is, when does the snow come? When does it start falling? And when does it end? I mean, because those are the key things. And I think it is important to just reiterate that our staff are actually driving around measuring the snow. And it really is the accumulation on the streets that they're looking at, not necessarily on your deck or in your yard or things like that. So it's the weather reports and what's coming with what we're actually seeing and what's fallen.
Part of what's changing is what we mentioned earlier. We had a snowstorm a couple years ago where there was like a 2 or 3 inch difference across St. Paul in what we call the snow gradient. So parts got very little, parts got a lot more. And so That's part of the nature of snow changing. But we'll literally go all over town, drop a ruler in fresh snow, and see what it looks like.
One of the hot topics, especially over on this side of the river, is municipal sidewalk clearing. And I know that that's a huge topic and a hot topic. What's the vibe? Is that kind of a long-term goal? Someday we'll have municipal sidewalk? Or is it like, St. Paul, we're a big city.
I'll reframe it because I think if we look larger, part of what Public Works oversees is our sidewalks. Like, it is critical. Sidewalks I use them to say they're the capillaries of our infrastructure system. They're the most, closest to people. And so it's really important, whether it's sidewalks that are, don't have tree heaves or broken panels, and the quadrants are handicap accessible. So having a really vibrant pedestrian system is really important. Part of that is clearing the corners, whether, that's frankly as important as the sidewalks themselves. What I would like to do is fully fund the snow strategy we have right now for streets and trails. We are still, even compared to Minneapolis, have much less money per capita or per mile before we take on something that big. But the question is really important in an urban setting where you want, available transit close to people, that it's not just last mile, it's like last 100 feet or last 100 yards is really important.
Right. So until there is the funding opportunity to really get out there and do it, it's up to us, the residents and the business owners. Like, your sidewalk right in front of your house, that's yours. Get out there or call for help, ask a neighbor, see what you can do.
If your question was what's my priority in that category, it would be clearing corners, quadrants in transit areas and low-income neighborhoods. That it's those quadrants that you can get down your street, but if you can't get across the intersection, if you're in a walker or a wheelchair or limited mobility, I think the corners would be my first priority. That takes equipment. You just can't go in with a shovel. That ice gets really thick. In those corners, in transit areas where people are more transit dependent.
Mm.
I would just add that, sidewalks are critical, and really, I don't know that I truly fully understood that until I, again, started working for Public Works and especially dealing with snow. And we have neighbors, who really end up being almost homebound because they cannot maneuver a wheelchair or a stroller or crutches because their neighbor doesn't shovel their sidewalk. So, again, this is that neighborly spirit of, yes, get out there and shovel your sidewalk and make that safe and passable, because not everybody necessarily uses the streets, but everybody uses the sidewalks. So they are a priority. And again, we need to come together and work together with the businesses and residents and, kind of think about your neighbors who maybe can't navigate or step over a little ice bridge or, walk around. So it really is helpful.
Well, that is all of my questions. We got through the whole list, which is pretty impressive. Anything else you want folks to know?
I think one thing that Lisa and I can't stress enough, because we know these folks, is how much the drivers doing the work care about the city. That they, there's a tendency to think they don't care, they do a bad job. Their one thing is to get to the curb. And, so I think an appreciation for how hard it is to be a driver when it's cold, and how exhausting it is, but how much they care about the work they do just can't be stressed enough, and how truly skilled some of them are. And back to your point, that it is one of the most important services in a northern city. It absolutely is. So that people have strong opinions about it is a factor. It's because it's so important. So we always think we can do better. We're actively trying to make our system better. That's a complex activity. I mean, it's really complex, but it's also super important. And Lisa and I, we get tired, but we love talking about it.
I think the other thing that people may not think about, that as a public works department, we need to think about every single day is, people are used to driving their routes, and they know those are their streets. It's their street, it's their route, and they can deviate from it, as they choose. And that's what we hear about, is like my street, my street, my street, which it is absolutely your street. But we have to also look at it as the entire system. And so it's not just, this, 2-block stretch, or, the mile you drive from your house to the grocery store or something like that, whatever it might be. It really is this large, complex system. And it's a lot to deal with any type of weather, not just a snow emergency. And we really do appreciate and we value when people let us know, hey, you missed this, or can you come back and do this? We will. I mean, we will do our best to get back there, and we will keep improving where we can. And I think, I'm just going to ask a little bit of patience and just kindness of, let us know and we will get to it. We will look at it. We will take a look at it. We will get back and do that pushback and that cleanup when we can. But we literally get hundreds and hundreds of requests with any kind of snowstorm. And so we'll try our best to get to all of them at some point. So, a little patience and a little grace can go a long way to helping everybody survive snow emergencies and a long Minnesota winter.
Yeah, that's one thing I like to share with my friends and family is if you do need to contact your government in any way, how to communicate your needs, wants, desires, the issues that you're encountering in a way that is like calm, collected, concise, and kind. Because the person on the other side of the email is just a person like you.
Yep, we're human, and it gets hard to not take some of that personally when you hear it over and over, and we're just coming off a snow emergency, and some of the things people have said it's hard to hear that nonstop, and it is also nice when we get the compliments, because we do get those as well, and so that's nice, and we appreciate all of it. So.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for coming on to the podcast. Thank you for teaching me and all of our listeners. Like, I do a lot of research before an episode, but I have learned so much in the last hour. This has been great. So thank you, Sean. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for this chance.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Streets.mn podcast. The show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative license, so feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was produced by Stina Neel, transcribed by Parker Seaman, aka Strongthany, and was hosted and edited by me, Ian R. Buck. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets.mn podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Streets.mn is a community blog and podcast and relies on contributions from audience members like you. If you can make a one-time or recurring donation, you can find more information about doing so at streets.mn/donate. Find other listeners and discuss this episode on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag StreetsMNPodcast. Until next time, take care.